Hey, what's going on, people? Decided to make another quick video, and this time around, I'm going to talk about the issue of historical revisionism. I noticed throughout YouTube and throughout the internet that there is this tendency by some black people to try and claim certain aspects of history, maybe as a way to uplift themselves or as a way to challenge the current establishment. What I'm talking about is, for instance, when you see people talking about Cleopatra and saying that she was black, or talking about Jesus Christ saying he was black, or talking about the ancient Egyptians saying that they were black people and all that stuff. And I've been wanting to address it, but I wasn't sure how I was going to make a video about it. So it was a while before I was able to think about a good way to address the whole issue. Let's get certain things out of the way before we continue. Cleopatra more than likely wasn't black, simply because she came from the Ptolemaic dynasty. Ptolemy was a general that worked for Alexander the Great, and after Alexander died, his dynasty was the one that ended up ruling Egypt for most of that period of time. And the Ptolemaic dynasty is known for inbreeding. They didn't really like mixing. They tried to keep their bloodline as quote unquote pure as possible. So more than likely, Cleopatra was not black. She may not have been white all the way, because there is evidence that along the line, certain women from the region that may have been darker got mixed up into the lineage. But even then, more than likely, Cleopatra wasn't black. She might have been tanned, like a white tanned skinned person, but she more than likely wasn't completely black, even because her relatives didn't really marry outside that much. Most of her bloodline was made up of family members that were, for the most part, Hellenic. They were Greeks. So chances are she wasn't black. There's a lot of historical evidence to support that. As far as Jesus Christ, there's no way he would have been black, because based on the region where he was born, and the fact that even according to the Bible, most people could not tell him apart from his disciples, he was more than likely a Semite. He looked like any other person living in that region at that time. So the likelihood of him being black is very, very low, if not impossible. And as far as the ancient Egyptians go, they Egypt at that time wasn't um, an homogeneous society. There were white people in Egypt, there were dark people in Egypt, there were light-skinned people in Egypt, there were Arabic people in Egypt. Egypt was a almost like a cradle of different cultures, really, because at the time Egypt was the biggest force in the world, and it was right in between Europe and Africa. So a lot of cultures and empires went by. I mean, I'm not going to go into a long diatribe about that, but if you look at the history of Egypt, they at different points had different races that were dominant. Did they have black pharaohs? Yes, some pharaohs are more than likely dark skinned. There's evidence to support that. But Egypt as a whole cannot really be viewed as black or white for that matter. They were just people from the region. And that being said, I think a lot of these ideas stemmed from the need of some African Americans to have a culture that they can attach themselves to. Unfortunately, when the Africans were brought to America, they were stripped of their identity. I think the best way to destroy any nation is to take away their collective identity. You take that away and you leave them with nothing. And I think a lot of the problems that affect the black community stem from that simple act. They took away their identity, and by taking that, they took away their ability to believe in themselves. And that has caused a lot of issues that affect many African Americans today. And I think a lot of these things come from that. People want to have a culture they can identify to, something that has nothing to do with the white power structure. And unfortunately, the main thing they can go back to is slavery, which was a result of uh, white people going into Africa to take them and whatnot. And a lot of African Americans don't want to identify themselves with that, so they try to pick certain aspects of history to find a better identity for themselves. And honestly, I don't think it's necessary to do that because, first of all, in sub-Saharan Africa, there were a lot of empires that are not always talked about in the history books, at least not in Western schools. Yeah, everyone knows about the Nubian Empire and the Kingdom of Kemet, but besides those, there were many other empires. Mali had a very powerful and very wealthy empire. The Oyo Empire is also very well known. And I mean, all throughout Africa, there were many, many different tribes and nations that were incredibly powerful, wealthy, and even technologically advanced. Even though most people would not believe that because people have been brainwashed into thinking that before white people discovered Africa, Africa was just a dark jungle. And that's not really the truth. But I think that all falls into the tactics that were used by the white enslavers at the time to belittle and trivialize whatever achievement black people might have made. And that was done to protect their interests at the time. But yeah, I think a lot of African Americans will find out that south of the Sahara, there were a lot of thriving and admirable cultures. It's just that people tend to associate, people talk about Egypt because that's the only big, great African nation they more than likely read about. People talk about Nubia because the Nubians had a lot of interactions with Egypt and they had interactions with European powers. So those are the two cultures that people tend to associate themselves with. But realistically speaking, there were many great cultures besides those two that made a lot of great achievements, but people don't know about them, so they don't really bother to try and associate themselves with all that. And I think that's something that should be fixed. I don't think it's helpful to try and find something in the past and try to attach yourself to that in order to prove that you're quote unquote not inferior. I don't believe that blacks are inferior. I think different cultures at different points in times have power. After all, the Asians were not always like this. Japan prior to the Meiji Restoration was a very backward feudal agricultural society. They didn't have great technological advancements and they weren't very powerful. But within the space of 100 years, actually around 80 years after the Meiji Restoration, they picked everything up really fast and almost overnight they became a world power. Prior to losing the war in World War II, they were the most powerful military force in Asia at the time. And this all happened within a very short period of time. China is becoming a very powerful economy right now. And up until not too long ago, the idea of China becoming this powerful would have been laughable. But it's happening now. Same thing with South Korea. They weren't always like this, but they improved. And I do believe that if great minds come together and there's a collective effort, Africa can easily rise up from all those things. It's just that we haven't gotten to that point. And I have my theories on that, but that would probably be for another video. So basically, the point of this video is I think a lot of black people should stop trying to create these pseudo cultures, trying to say, oh, I'm a black Israelite, or I'm a Nubian, or we're all kings and queens and all that. I know it's a way for people to try and empower themselves, but it doesn't really do anything in the long run. Because first of all, it's not based on anything true, so you can't really believe it within yourself. And secondly, it doesn't do anything to change the status quo. You know, there are big problems in the black community that need to be addressed. And I think that trying to latch on to old ideas and old nations or old identities is not going to do anything for anyone. I mean, I don't expect every African American person to try and find out where they're really from because not everyone has the money to do such DNA tests. But I think that at the end of the day, the only identity that a group of people can have is the identity they choose to give themselves. And I think if blacks realize that, a lot of good positive changes will happen. And a good example of that, if you go by what people say on Fox News or what some white people say, you will think that Africans or African Americans are inherently criminal or dumb or whatever, but that's not really the case. Yeah, it's true in the African American community, a lot of things happen, but there are socioeconomic factors stemming from years of oppression that led to the current situation. And any social scientist will tell you that. And if you look at the Africans that come here in America, they actually do very well. They routinely perform better than a lot of their counterparts in school. And the median income of an average African family in America is actually quite high. I was telling that to a group of friends of mine that are white, and they were shocked until they saw the statistics online and they went to find out for themselves. So that right there is proof that these things are not inherent. It's all about opportunity and knowledge. Africans have the privilege of knowing their culture already. So even if people might say whatever they want about them, they know that that's not true. In Africa, they have values in Africa that are not really affected by a history of slavery and oppression or Jim Crow or any of that stuff. So when they come here, they tend to make better use of the resources available to them. And that right there is proof that if a group of people decide to develop an identity for themselves and not let stereotypes and other people's judgments shape your idea of yourself, if people choose to rise above that, they can make great strides. They can achieve great things, and that's what I think people should try to do. And I don't think a simple video on YouTube is going to change that. But I always try to tell my black friends here in America that that's probably the best way to go about things. Trying to find an identity in Nubia and all those old ancient kingdoms that don't even exist anymore, it's not going to do anything for anyone. It's not proof of superiority, it's not proof of excellence. But you can try and make a new history. You can try and make a new identity for yourself. Because, yeah, some white people may say what they want about blacks. They may laugh at black people and say all those nasty things, but at the end of the day, that's just their opinion. The only opinion that should matter to black people is the opinion they have of themselves. Malcolm X actually talked about that in one of his speeches, and I definitely agree with that. So that's what I think. I think black people need to find an identity for themselves, and they shouldn't let whatever white people say deter them from getting there. And before I get lambasted for saying white people, I'm talking about racist white people, because I know there will be some white person coming on my video saying I'm racist. So yeah, I just wanted to make a quick video about that. And till next time, guys.